Welcome to our We Are Three podcast, Returning to Real series. This series is intended to be light and fun and explorative as we interview guests. And we wanted to interview guests for our summer series because we wanted to tap into the wisdom and insights of different people and really wanted to broaden the perspective for our listeners. So we're really, really happy that you're joining us for today's podcast. All of our podcasts are founded in our raw, risky, and real approach as we begin to uncover the movement from wounds to wellness. So there's something for everyone in all of our podcasts, and we certainly hope that you enjoy today's podcast. I will turn it over to you, Carm, to introduce our wonderful guest today.
Hello, Suzanne and I are so excited today to be in the presence of Jennifer Jurkofsky. And I'll introduce Jennifer. She is a psychotherapist who believes in using a fully holistic healing modality when working with her clients. Her private practice is called My Holistic Self-Counseling. I just love that name. Some of her goals are to help people heal from experiencing and negative limiting beliefs and to grow mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And Jennifer writes on her website that by developing a connection with one's true self, we begin to understand that the conditional beliefs and coping skills we have come to rely on are often the very things causing us pain and suffering. So true. Yeah. Some of the services Jennifer offers are psychotherapy, mindfulness, meditation, and art therapy. She lives in Gatineau, Quebec with her 2 children. Welcome, Jennifer. We are so excited to have you today.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm so honored to be here.
Yeah. So I mentioned I just love the name of your private practice, My Holistic Self-Counseling. Can you explain what this means to you and why you chose this for your practice name?
I actually chose this name a really long time ago when I first got into doing Reiki and Reiki treatments. The idea of treating the whole person has always been a passion for me. So when we only treat particular parts of ourselves, like, we talk about in therapy, treating a symptom, we're kind of putting a Band-Aid on a flesh wound. We're not really treating the whole of who we are and how we're showing up in each experience. So the idea of a holistic approach encourages us to look at all of the parts of us and all of the parts of our experience so that we can understand that intimate connection that each part of us has with the others and with the situation. So the self, which we'll talk about in a little bit, is the part of us that I think many have forgotten, this idea of true self. And ultimately, My Holistic Self proposes the idea that we're taking back our awareness and our ownership of each intricate part of what makes us whole and embracing that part of us that is our true self.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love that, Jen. I love it. And as you were talking, I was thinking, we only really identify with what we see, right? So, but there's so much more. And I was thinking, mind, body, and spirit when you were talking. And so is that when you talk about holistic, and when you talk about all of those individual parts, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, on so many levels, we pick the part of us that we're the most comfortable with. And that's the part that we use to show up. But that part isn't whole. It isn't the full the fullness of who we are. And so when we pick only specific pieces of ourselves that we're comfortable with or that we feel protected using, we're negating huge parts of us, and we're continuing to wound ourselves in that process. So if we're able to acknowledge, not, some of us will show up and we're very cerebral and we're just the mind. Some of us are very physical and we're just the body. And some of us are often, out somewhere else, and we live in our imagination, and we're never present or grounded or here and fully experiencing. And so when we talk about things like the Enneagram, right, we talk about how each of those pieces play a part, and how we're all kind of drawn to specific parts of ourselves and show up that way. But that, the idea here is, let's bring all of these pieces together. Let's embrace all of them. And let's understand that even though we are parts of all of these, like all of these pieces are a part of us, that we are so much more than all of these parts as well. And that's that true self piece, which we'll talk about.
I love the way you explain that, and in terms of the body, mind, soul connection, and allowing all of that to be part of us, that holisticness. We're not just one of those, we're all of those, all of those parts. Yeah, yeah. And we're comfortable with certain parts, like you mentioned, showing up in the lead, and maybe we're not being authentic or real. And so it's isn't it always a journey in figuring that out?
Yeah. And most often we have very specific parts that we deny, and we deny them because we're afraid of the pain that will come if we are willing to allow them into our experience, not understanding that bringing that congruence back and allowing ourselves to process through that, we do become whole.
Jen, tell us a little bit more about that. We deny parts of ourselves because we're afraid of the pain. And so for me, that speaks of healing. When we, can get to the point where we don't deny those parts of ourselves. So tell us what healing means to you.
Yeah. We talk about healing, like healing a wound, right? Or healing like something medical. But one of the things I think that we forget to recognize when we come to healing, especially in mental health, is like we're not making something new. We're restoring, we're rebuilding, we're regenerating, we're repairing. We're coming back to that truth. That is the key for healing. We're not finding something that we've never had. We're not finding something brand new. We're coming back, and we're returning to what we've always been, this true self, part of us that is whole, that does know, that is able to feel and understand what we need at any given moment. We're bringing back together all those broken pieces, all of the shards that have been shattered, taken, discarded, denied, whatever our circumstance is, and we're bringing them back to wholeness, and that's healing. It's not about making a new perfect piece, but embracing each part, all of our cracks, all of our chips, all of our imperfections, and understanding that we can accept and value and love all of those parts of ourselves. We actually I was just thinking, in the Chinese or Japanese, I think it's a Japanese tradition, they talk about how in repairing pottery, they actually fill the cracks with gold, so that it emphasizes the beauty of something that's lived, something that's experienced, something that, is able to come back and be like, yeah, I went through that and I'm okay. And it's actually made me stronger and made me more beautiful. And that's what healing is all about.
there's stigma attached to our faults and to the
Mm.
process of healing. And what you've just redefined for us, Jen, is really the beauty and the sacredness that comes with healing. Healing is sacred. And it's not, and I loved the way I can't wait to listen to the podcast again to hear
Yeah.
wise words that you said. It's about the re's, right? Recover, regenerate, and there you had a few more, but it's about returning.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
Carmen and I talk about returning to real. We were truly born perfect or perfectly imperfect. And
Perfectly imperfect. Mhm.
yes. And that's and we need to honor that the healing is that return. And what a beautiful space. Mm.
I love that metaphor of the pottery. I often visualize that too. And it gives us permission to love ourselves, all nooks and chips and dents and cracks and all the traumas, all the pain, the thing that all the things we've experienced simply because we're human having a life. Yeah. And it reminded me when she was talking, Susanna, a few years ago, you and I went to a retreat in the Muskokas, and the building was intentionally built to have imperfections in the space of the workshop. So it was a comfortable space. It was welcoming space. It was warm and imperfect. And so you could be looking at the wood on the walls, for example, and notice that they didn't align right, or the coloring was off or something, but it was intentionally there as a message that nothing is perfect and that's okay.
And they highlighted it, right? Like that
Yeah,
was,
they
it wasn't
highlighted it.
something that they tried to hide. In fact, it was featured. It was one of the features. The imperfections were a feature.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
Brilliant.
reminding us of that.
that's what it reminded me of. And so it gives you permission, even on our healing journey, that we don't have to hate those parts. We can welcome them with kindness and compassion, and as it's okay. Mhm. They're gifts. They can be gifts. Mhm. I also really love, like, I can hear the passion in your voice when you're talking, and I just, I get all excited to hear how passionate you are. And Suzanne and I, we often talk about the notion of being a wounded healer. We've taken the compassion inquiry course with Dr. Gabor Mati. We're practitioners, and one of the things we talk about and learn about is we are all wounded healers. So we believe that, and I'm wondering if that resonates with you as well.
Most definitely. Most definitely. I actually do talk a little bit about it on my website when I get into kind of how I got into helping professions in general. Um, I've always had a passion to help others, and I really think that came from my childhood. My mother had some serious mental health issues, struggled with addiction, and I really started to study mental health in order to understand my own experiences, to help
Mm,
myself, to not question my own reality, but to feel like, okay, no, I do understand what's going on, and this is not okay. And then being able to take that, my own wounding, right, that
mhm,
propelled me to understand mental health, to understand healing, and to embrace those parts of me that were fallen apart, that were shattered, that were broken. And through learning to accept and love and see the beauty of how they've shown up in my life, and being able to
mm,
see how they together, like a stained glass window, right, make up the beauty of my being, I'm able to then hold that space for someone else. And it's not to say that if you've never been through an experience or you have to have gone through the exact same experience or things like that, that's not it. I really feel that having just been able to go through that, we're more able to authentically accept and have compassion for what comes up for others in their experiences, right? And we can embrace them in their imperfections. And
Mm-hmm.
that's really the heart of the wounded healer, right? It's that we may not know exactly what you're going through. We may not have had the same experience, but we know what it is to be broken. And we know what it is to try to come back and put
Mm,
ourselves back together.
beautifully said. And I think what it does as well is it levels the playing field.
Yeah.
And you know, when you're working with someone, you're no longer the expert.
Mhm.
In fact, you're sharing. It's a sharing, and it's a connection rather than, you know, sort of, I'll say, more of an antiquated way of looking at therapy and therapists as I'll go to them to get the answer. What I hear you describe is we don't necessarily have, or you don't necessarily have the answer. In fact, the person has the answer. But what you can do from your space of woundedness is really be there and attune to them in their space of woundedness.
Yeah. And see
Yeah.
them
And just
for,
adds the whole other level of compassion, right? We don't necessarily have to all have walked in all of the issues or all of the problems, but we felt the emotions. We feel the sadness, we feel pain. So there's that connection to all the emotions that people feel, I think, as a wounded healer. And I also really feel that we can't take a client any further than we're willing to go ourselves. And so the fact that we've been on a healing journey ourselves, the fact that we know that we is so important, so important. And I hear you say that when you talked about when you shared your personal experience, and we resonate with that too.
Mhm. Yeah.
Beautiful, Jen. Just beautiful. Absolutely. Mm,
Mm-hmm.
our yeah, so our podcast series is called Returning to Real. And you know, we explore practices and techniques to return to our authentic selves. But you talk about returning to your true self on your website, and I'd invite everybody to go to your website. We'll tell people how they can reach you after the podcast. But you talk about the notion and the concept of the true self. And you say the true self is our wise mind, heart of hearts, inner being, consciousness, Atman, or Buddha nature. Tell us what you mean by this and the impact on your clients.
Yeah. So the true self is, again, the authentic self. And even in wise mind, which is used in DBT and things like that. Um, from the moment we're born, we begin to learn that we are a bundle of feelings and thoughts and experiences, right? We develop these identities around all of these things that happen to us. And and somehow we begin to believe that we're the sum of these thoughts and feelings and experiences, that we begin to forget who we really are, who we were before those experiences, and who we're going to be after those experiences. We get so enmeshed in the thoughts, the feelings, that we don't realize that we're actually the one observing them. And
The
the
witness.
the witness, the witnessing
Yeah,
presence,
yeah.
yes. And the true self is never defined by these things, but it understands that they're all passing expressions, right? Like we look to the clouds and we see them pass over, and they might stay in the sky for a minute, they might stay in the sky for an hour, but they're going to pass over, right? And if we try to grasp them, we give them power. And that's what we do with our thoughts and our feelings, right? We hold on to them and we embrace them and we think of them as who we are. And yet, if we were to just allow them and allow them to pass through, to sit back, to observe them, we empower our true self. And it's in that moment of empowering who we really are, this witnessing presence, that we see that life, all of these experiences, all these thoughts, all these feelings, our whole perception of them changes. And we're no longer pulled here and there, but we're able to control how we respond to them, right? We're not crashed in the waves. We're sitting on the shore, looking at them, observing them, and we're really able to be present with things that we've avoided or tried not to think about or tried not to feel for so long.
What I think I hear you say is the importance in separating from or distinguishing ourselves from our thoughts and, well, from our thoughts and our feelings. And it's not that they don't exist. Absolutely, they're there. But how do we create that space between them so that they're not us?
Mhm.
You have a guess.
Yeah.
We have another guess.
Always.
Oh.
Yeah. We identify with so much of this life, right? I am a mother, I am a counselor, I am a cat mom, right? I think certain ways, I believe certain things, I have these feelings, and they're so enmeshed in who I am as a person. And yet my true self observes that these thoughts come and go, that these feelings come and go, that this experience, even that I'm practicing in this certain way, is a now thing. And it might be a rest of my life thing, or it might be, a for now thing, and that's okay. It's all okay.
Is that notion of separation, like you're attached, but you're not attached to an outcome.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. And that another way to explain it from maybe a different perspective is like I have anxiety. I am not anxiety. I have sadness. I am not sadness. I have pain, but I am not pain. And so just that little bit of separation or, disentanglement, a bit of distance can like our true self is the core, like that at the center of all of that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sorry, the cat just went out of the room. I'll just leave it at that. Yeah, exactly. And we, if we can understand, okay, I am not my thoughts, I am not my feelings, suddenly they don't have as much power over us, right? But we are able to take power over them. If I feel like I am my thoughts, then all of those things that come in that are hard and dark and not part of what I want to experience become part of who I am. But if I say, no, I'm not this thought, then I don't have to hold on to it. I can take the message that it has for me, figure out what it's trying to tell me, what I'm not okay with, what's making me uncomfortable, what's making me feel uneasy, and address that. But I don't have to keep the thought. The thought can be the messenger that it's meant to be, and then it can go.
I really
Float
like
away with
that.
those clouds. Mhm. Yeah, it can float away with those clouds you mentioned earlier. Yeah.
In shamanism, we might call that the line of indifference,
Mhm.
right? That space, there's the gap. It's the gap, right? We can actually use the thoughts to help us rather than have them be, and I'll generalize, but I think we have a culture where our thoughts are the suffering. They are absolutely the root of our suffering.
Yeah.
And so it's not about eliminating them. We're not talking about not having them. We're talking about actually welcoming them, noticing them, and using them on our healing journey
Yeah.
rather than have them define us.
Mhm.
It really is a shift in the way most people perceive themselves, isn't it?
Mhm.
There's freedom in looking at it that way. There's so much freedom in the healing. Mhm.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Jenna, oh, go ahead, Suzanne.
I was just going to say, Carm, I like the way you used the word freedom, and that's exactly it. People come to us because they're often really, really stuck, and they want to experience the freedom
Mhm.
to be themselves. And to me, it's such a powerful word because there is such freedom in understanding what we just talked about. And one of the things that I often say, and I think I've said it in so many podcasts, is like, don't believe anything you think. Like, just don't believe it, because it's probably not true. It's a story. It's a story, right? What we're talking about is finding the freedom through taking another route to the truth, to going in deeper, um, and that's where the freedom lies, not in the thoughts that keep just coming in. Yeah.
Mhm. It's funny.
I know, Suzanne, you quoted in another podcast how many thoughts a day we actually do have.
I think
And it
60,000, like 60,000. And, oh, now you're going to get me going, Carm. And it's the same 60,000 thoughts every single day. And you think, oh my gosh, like I'm 56, right? And so I like, it's the same in my mind. It's exactly the same day over and over and over and over and over again, because I just keep having the same 60,000 thoughts every day.
Yeah.
And how crazy making is it when we actually believe that we are all of those things that come through. I'll stop.
It all goes down in our mind, right? The stories we create, our perceptions. And when we really get that, we can write our next chapter, right? We can show up real.
Yeah.
Mm.
I remember years ago going through a few things, and I was down visiting my family, and we were down the shore. So the ocean is a very big symbol for me.
Mm.
And I remember sitting there, and a poem kind of just came to me. And it was about that freedom that we can have when we let go of the attachment to those thoughts. It's a little abstract, but if you want, I can share it.
Oh, I'd love
Yeah,
that.
absolutely.
It's called Perpetual Wonderment. And it goes, I is the prison for the self. Oh, mind, be silent. The story yells, but no longer pulls. Attachment dissolves, washed away by the waves. All beings love. Oneness observes. Listen with attention to the echoing silence. The eyes see without judgment. The ears hear without interpretation. Touch is a caress of sensations without desire. Watching, Yarakiv. The mind rests. The heart connects. In this place, active emptiness, eternal presence, perpetual wonderment.
Beautiful.
Presence, perpetual wonderment.
And for me, I just experienced like a blanket of warmth as you're listening to you talk about like that. Wow, it's so, the words are just powerful, and the just got little goosebumps. I love it.
Yeah,
And you have it memorized.
it's been really powerful for me in again remembering, you know, what I see, I need to see without judgment. I can't interpret the thoughts and the things that come in or what other people say. I need to only really focus on how I show up, how I present, how I choose to be in this moment. And I can only do that in a state of active emptiness, where I'm not attached to these thoughts, these feelings, these responses, defense mechanisms that I've learned that just don't serve me anymore.
It's beautiful, Jen, and I can, and I'm probably not going to say it in the eloquent way that you said it, but I can only be responsible for the way that I show up.
Mm-hmm.
And if we could only practice that for our entire life, it would be enough. Yeah. And I think that it would be. And I think that's what, you know, and I'm thinking of, you know, maybe some of our listeners, and I think back to myself 30 years ago, 25 years ago, where all of this felt so incredibly overwhelming to me, because I thought, how can I possibly ever incorporate all of these things? And what does this mean? And what does that mean? And how do I do all of these things that they're talking about? And if I had have only known then what I know now, which is why I'm going to say it and why I mentioned it, is if we only practice one small part, it's enough. And I'm not, it's enough. And I don't know who said it. And maybe it is Eckhart Tolle, maybe it's not. I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but who said, you know, if your only prayer was thank you, it would be enough. Mm-hmm. And Carm, we've talked about, you know, if we just practice gratitude, it's enough. If we just practice witnessing our thoughts, it's enough. Mm-hmm.
Instead of feeling the overwhelm of yourself 25, 30 years ago felt, now you can look back, and if there was a message you could say to your younger self, it's just one step at a time, one practice at a time.
Yeah, it's just a more compassionate way of
absolutely
healing, of growing. What I practice today, it's okay. Okay. Tomorrow something else might come. Yeah.
And bringing back the notion of what Jennifer talked about earlier around the brokenness and the gold and the pottery and the cracks, right? I think that fits in there too, because when we don't have to be perfect at anything we're trying. We don't have to be perfect at meditation. We don't have to be perfect at any practice we're learning or trying, or even in one that we've been doing for 30 years. You know, that is okay. Mess it up. it's okay. Mhm.
That's such a huge thing. It's okay, right? We live trying to be a certain thing, trying to show up a certain way because we feel like that's what's going to make us valuable. That's what's going to make us loved. But just being is enough, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Words of wisdom, just being is enough, and that's okay.
One of the phrases I often have to remind myself is that I'm a human being, not a human doing. So I can really get caught up in my doings. So that's a gentle reminder, which is so important, that we can just be.
I love that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So Jen, another thing that Suzanne and I are so curious about is another service that you offer in terms of the Enneagram. And did I say that right?
Enneagram.
Enneagram. Okay. So this is something that I know nothing about. So I am super curious to learn from you this afternoon. What is the Enneagram, and how many? I think there's 8 personality types, but just please walk us through that, and what's it all about? How does that work in your practice?
Sure. Well, there's okay. So what the Enneagram is I guess it's been referred to as, and I think I have it on the website, this ancient blueprint for how we understand life. But it's really about understanding how we've chosen to show up because of the fears that we've embraced, the things that we feel we're lacking. But also, it expresses the virtues and the holy ideas that we can bring to the world if we're able to
Mm,
overcome those fears. And so, really, it's
mm,
give you a little background. So, I was first introduced to the Enneagram by my aunt when I was 12 years old. So, even then, I loved it. At 12,
mm.
I could see
Wow.
it
Yeah.
explained how I interacted with my brothers, how like misconstrued things, and now I use the words like showing up and my distorted worldviews and my ego self. But at the time I was like, oh man, I really, I fell right into that and did exactly the way my type would respond. And, it helps us to understand the fears that drive us and
Mm,
the mechanisms that we use to avoid pain. Um, and so, you're talking about returning to real, right? And living more authentically with our experiences. And the Enneagram
yeah.
definitely gets into that. You know, there's 9 basic types to the Enneagram, but even that's a bit of a simplification because there's wings and patterns and subtypes and variations and things. But when working with the Enneagram, the first place to start is really to identify what our type is. And then just that alone gives us a ton of stuff to start to unpack and work
Mm,
through when we look at, our thought patterns, right? Like you were saying about how we have, all of these thoughts, 60 some thousand thoughts, Suzanne, a day, and they're always the same thoughts, right? And that's about those patterns that we've established over time. And then all of the feelings and the behaviors that are so intricately connected to those thoughts and how they all kind of make this pattern of the same things in our life over and over and over again. So I guess to get into them, there's a lot of different names that you can use for each of the Enneagram types. I as Carmen knows, and I'm not a fan of labels, only because I feel like oftentimes we embrace our label and then we don't feel that we can get out of it, or we feel we take ownership just like we do our thoughts and feelings on the label and then try to use that to define us. But for the sake of this, we'll go through it and I'll tell you what some of the labels are. So we'll start
I
at,
think labels can help us understand why we show up a certain way. It explains behavior. It doesn't explain it, but I love it as a framework, right? It can help us from that perspective. Yeah.
exactly. Okay, so type 1 is the reformer, the perfectionist, the achiever. Ones feel dutiful to strive for excellence. They have to be perfect. They believe the world is imperfect and it is their responsibility to correct that. They thirst for perfection. Everything has to be 100%. And they do that because their moral ideal, what they feel morally responsible for, is kind of correcting all of the error that they see in the world. They can never allow themselves to be perceived as bad, as mediocre. That's their greatest fear. So they believe they have to be perfect in order to be loved, to be accepted, to be valued. And they long for serenity. That's the virtue that they can bring to the world, right? To be able to accept the world in its own holy perfection, right? But because they're always striving, they're never obtaining. So getting caught up in that anger and resentment, they want to reduce their anxiety, which is really caused by their own thoughts and feelings, as it is with so many of us. Um, that, but they believe that their own thoughts and feelings are so unacceptable that they act in a way that's sometimes opposite to their true self because they have to show up in a way that they perceive others will feel is perfect. I don't know if you want me to just keep going through them or.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Keep going through them and look. Yeah.
So 2 is the helper, the giver. The 2 believes that their value, their ability to be loved comes from being needed. So their need to be needed causes them to give of themselves, whether it's gifts, attention, service, advice, whatever it is, in order to feel worthy and valuable, they have to give. And so they often have to present as, loving and thoughtful and generous, never selfish, never insensitive. And a lot of times we think, okay, yeah, like this is a good thing, right? To be loving and to be generous, but they think that the world's suffering is their duty to alleviate. And that thirst for appreciation of helping others helps them to avoid their own feeling of not being worthy, right? And so they feel this deep sense of self-worth that is completely dependent on how others respond to them. And so even though they long for freedom and a will of their own so that they can bring humility to the world, they suppress that. They suppress their own feelings, their own desires, their own needs, so that they can help others, sacrifice themselves in order to be lovable and wanted. Number 3 is the performer, or the succeeder, the achiever, the status seeker. Their value is in what they accomplish. So they need respect of others. They want to achieve. Their success is what brings them admiration. They believe that there's a lack of flow, a lack of order in the world, and it's their job to organize it, to put it together, to make it work. So they present very self-assured, very confident, because that's how they have to be perceived. They're very professional, they're very competent. There's never idle time, they're not inadequate, because if they were inadequate, they wouldn't be worthy of love. They long to love themselves, but they feel that they are only loved for what they do, not for just being who they are. They need their success, and they need that in order to be admired, to be accepted. And then what ends up happening is oftentimes they take those ideals of what they think is admirable, and they bring that on. And so their self gets so jumbled up in what they perceive they need to be, that they become indistinguishable from the perception and who they really are, because who they really are isn't good enough. 4, the tragic romantic, the artist, the individualist. These guys hate to be typed. They are one of a kind, and they do not fit into any kind of personality typing at all. They have to be deeply authentic. They have to have deep connections with everything, finding meaning and symbolism and beauty in everything as a way to understand suffering. They have to be original, they have to be authentic, never ordinary, and definitely not boring, right? They believe that there is a profound despair in the world that comes from disconnection. And so it's their job to reestablish that connection through beauty. They long for connection and balance, but they feel different from everyone and everything. And to show that difference brings about fear of rejection, not being good enough, not being heard, not being accepted in their individuality. They're always internalizing negativity about themselves, but they don't have that counterbalance of positivity. They don't bring that in. And so they're only ever embracing that negative part. And that's that tragic romantic piece, right? Where they're always seeking to discover themselves and balance their uniqueness with connection. And when they find that, they're able to bring such beauty and connection into the world. Number 5 is the thinker, the observer, the investigator. They live in their mind. It's not the observer like what we were talking about before when we talk about like observing our thoughts and feelings. The observer needs to perceive and understand everything. They have to absorb it all in order to feel safe. They're very cerebral. They're often emotionally detached, and they keep everything inside. 5s are exceptionally private. They don't want to be seen. They don't want to be intruded upon, because if they're seen, if somebody comes to them, that's going to deplete them. And they believe that there's only so much resource in the world, and that is pretty scarce. And so they have to conserve that energy by keeping everything tight and close and not allowing themselves to be pulled out too much. They need to be knowledgeable because they need to be autonomous. Right? They can't be emotional, they can't be transparent, and they definitely can't be dependent. So when they fully retreat into their minds, they cut off from their feelings, they cut off from somatic experience. And that separation from others, that kind of compartmentalizing all the various parts of themselves, makes them long for really understanding and experiencing life in its wholeness. And when they're able to work through that, that's exactly what they can bring to us, is that deep wholeness and acceptance. 6, which is the loyalist or the guardian, or some even call the devil's advocate, because they know the world is unstable, it's unpredictable, and it is just downright dangerous. They feel that they have to find meaning and stability and support in others to survive, because they're always on high alert. They're always worried about the next danger. They're always anticipating every possible problem, and they have to be prepared, but they don't trust themselves. So they have to find others to trust in order to feel safe. 6s are deeply loyal. They long for consistency, but they don't feel that that's possible in the world. And they definitely can't trust themselves to bring it about. So that lack of self-trust propels them to project those thoughts and feelings and behaviors, good or bad, onto others. So it's always somebody else who did it. It's always somebody else who's going to take care of it. It's always somebody else who made the mistake. It's always somebody else, period. But when they're able to finally trust in themselves, they bring the virtue of courage. It's a great gift that they can bring to the world when they find that inner strength. 7 is the enthusiast, the epicure, the dreamer. 7s want to experience everything that's new, that's exciting, that's stimulating. If it brings pleasure, they want to try it, but don't touch pain. Part of them is always seeking because they feel like the world is lacking. And so it's their job to bring in all the possibilities and to make sure that they're the ones that are generating all of this excitement and all of this pleasure. They're optimistic, they're enthusiastic. Some say that they're the Don Juan or Don Juanitas of the Enneagram, right? Because they're just so full of life, but they don't feel complete. They don't feel whole. They don't feel solid because they don't let themselves truly feel. Any pain, any suffering, any discomfort or limitation, they can't handle. And so they're always pushing it aside, pushing how they are, how they show up, how that might impact somebody else, pushing that aside because it's on to the next thing. It's on to the next bigger, better, more pleasurable situation. When they're able to tone that in, they bring wisdom and they bring the virtue of sobriety because they're finally able to understand that we are complete just as we are, and we don't need to seek outside of ourselves. 8, the challenger, the boss, the confronter, the leader. 8s are bossy and they're big and they show up and they're intimidating. And, 8s are, the one who is going to scare you out of your mind, but is the biggest ball of mush on the inside. They long for autonomy and they want intensity of connection, but they feel like the world is unjust and the weak are going to be taken advantage of. And it is their job to make things right. They long for truth, for justice, for control, and they can never be seen as vulnerable or weak because that's cowardly. They're grandiose, right? Like 8s put on the big show, but they're falling apart inside. They thirst for control and justice because they don't have it within them. And yet, when an 8 feels like they're in control, when they feel like things are okay, there is a purity that they bring, an innocence that they bring into the world. They embrace that wounded child, right? And they're able to bring all of the goodness of that awe, right? Perpetual wonderment, that idea of like, things are actually okay and they are just, and they bring that into the world so that they can be in awe. 9s, the peacemaker, the mediator. 9s are the ones that don't have an opinion. They don't want to make a choice. It's okay, we'll do whatever you want to do, right? They want peace, they want harmony so deeply that they're willing to lose their own sense of self in order to keep it. They avoid conflict. They can't express their own thoughts about something. They don't want to rock the boat. 9s really believe that everyone deserves to be respected and heard, and that it's their job to embrace that at the detriment of being heard themselves. They numb themselves to avoid the uncomfortable thoughts and feelings that they have that come up, because if they express them, they might disrupt the peace. They merge so deeply with others that they lose sight of who they are. They hide in routines. They don't want to do anything that's going to make somebody else upset. And so they long to know that they matter enough to be able to speak their truth and to be heard. But they have to be perceived as accepting and easygoing, and so they deny that longing. And yet, if they embrace that, they bring a holy love into the world, a virtue-based, a values-based action that allows them to really act authentically. And that's 1 through 9.
Wow.
Wow. Yes. I
Love it.
recognized myself in a couple, like probably I'd say maybe about 3 of them. Little nuggets here and there in some of the other ones, but a couple of times I went, oh, she knows me.
Well, and the beauty with the Enneagram too is we have our main type, but then each type has a different type that it goes to when it's struggling. And it has another type that it goes to when it feels secure. And it has wings in the various types. And so we're never just one thing, right? When we feel stress, we overcompensate by acting as our counter type, right? When we feel secure, we're able to relax in some of our virtues that are expressed in another type. And so it brings kind of the wholeness again, right? Of who we are together.
It really, really blends well, fits well with internal family systems model, for example, and the way you just explained that to me, it resonates with, we have different parts, or as you walk through those 9 profiles, I was like, Suzanne, like, okay, yep, there's probably 2 or 3 I definitely really resonated with, and I'm sure our listeners and viewers will be feeling the same way. So is there a quiz that you take? Like, is it just a knowing you have? Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. There's definitely quizzes that you can take. The Enneagram Institute has some online. There's a couple free ones as well. There's some longer ones, some shorter ones. One of the things with just taking a quiz is it will give you what you score in all of them. So
Oh yeah.
again, when you think about personality, right, depending on how we're feeling at any given time,
Yeah.
we might show up one way or another. And so it's interesting when you do take the tests to really look at, okay, what was I feeling and what are my main ones? Because sometimes we end up testing in our compatible ones, right? So like our type plus the 2 that we go to, or maybe we're a certain type that has a really strong wing in the next type over. So there's a bit of intricacy when it comes to the testing. Also, when we talk about like cultural sensitivity, depending on where we're located, it might show up a bit differently. As Carmen knows, I love books. There's
Yeah.
great Enneagram books out there. One of them,
Jennifer has the best library that I know. Yes.
The Art of Typing, is really great because it breaks down each of the types, but then it also talks about mistyping and how, this type is very similar to this type because of this. But if we look at our why, if we look at our motivation, that's going to kind of distinguish between the 2 types. And then I'm going to go through a couple. This one actually was one that Carmen had said, Jen, you're into the Enneagram. You need to read this. And I love this book. I absolutely love it. I have both of them. And I have the workbooks that go with it. And I think that they are phenomenal. And he really gets into the spiritual side of the Enneagram and the spiritual growth that comes from working through all of these defenses that we've developed. For the millennials out there, millenniagram, which types it a bit differently, and it has that very kind of edgy way of looking at the Enneagram. It's fun. If you want to get really clinical, it's probably not the one for you, but if you want to just kind of have fun with exploring it, it's great. And then
From a clinical perspective, what I get and what I'm really getting from this is what I love about the profiles is the way you explained in each one of them that once you know yourself or you know how you show up, that the flip side to that, of like the good qualities that you bring into the world once you have that awareness and information.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we stop, denying parts of ourselves, because we understand that, wow, when I embrace this, it makes me stronger. It makes me better. It makes me able to show up the way I long to show up, but have not been able to, because I'm embracing these defense mechanisms that deny that part of me.
Mm,
So it
I love
is
that.
about, as it's like Suzanne and I talk a lot about, it's the process is the same in terms of what are my core beliefs. So each profile you described has a core belief about themselves, right? And certain defense mechanisms. So it's about getting to understand that, knowing that, how you show up, and the why. Yeah.
I feel like we need an entire podcast for the Enneagram, and
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
2 or 3. So something
Yeah.
tells me that we're going to be inviting you back, Jen, just to hear so much more. I have so many questions, but I also want to hear about some of the other things that you do. Art, or therapeutic art.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. I do therapeutic art, and I actually don't have it on my website yet, but I also do shamanic art. And the beauty of art is that there's not judgment in art. We're able to express things that come from deep inside of us without judging them, right? What we put on that paper can tell us so much intuitively about what's going on inside of us. We can release pain that we didn't even realize we had. We can reduce stress. If we focus on an emotion and we try to put that on the paper, we can begin to process it and release it. There's so many different things that you can do. I know, mandalas is a really big thing right now, and kind of that meditative way of, coloring them and things like that. And it's a way of bringing us out of, again, that repetition of thoughts that continue for us, and allowing them to be released onto a paper, a parchment, a canvas, or whatever it is, in a way that is safe and can be beautiful. If we want to work towards, you know, a goal or something that we feel we want to achieve or become, we can do that kind of vision or dream board work where we're really exploring what does that look like. And then I love the beauty in saying, okay, now, how do we already have that, right? Because so often we're seeking something that we think is outside of us, and yet it's always within us. And so again, that art allows us that moment of contemplation where we can come back and say, okay, yeah, I can see how, this is something I'm, again, going back to even the Enneagram, this is something I'm longing for, but I can find it within me in this very moment. It's not something that I'm actually lacking.
Jen, what I so appreciate about everything that you've said is there are so many diverse ways, and that's what I think you're expressing. And even, what I read on your website, and you're a Reiki master, right? So that's just one example. You said you do shamanic art as well. You've talked about the Enneagrams, the therapeutic art, and of course all of your clinical skills. But what I so appreciate is that people are diverse. Nobody fits into a box, and what works for one maybe doesn't work for another. So what you're bringing to the table is, let's hear all of these tools. Let's find one that helps you get to that true self that's already there. And for me, it goes back to using those tools to return, recover, and realign all of the re's, right? What I'm in awe of all of the things that you bring to the table, and all of the ways that you help a person return to their real self.
I going back to even something we said earlier, right, is as a healer, because we're all in this kind of healing profession, as a healer, it's not my job to heal you. It is my job to help you figure out how you're going to heal yourself. And all I'm doing is holding a space for you to realize you can do that. And so
Beautifully stated. Beautifully stated. Yeah. And here's your toolbox. Beautiful holistic modalities, approaches, just absolutely beautiful. And that's what we need as healers, isn't it? A diverse toolbox. And thank you so much for sharing that with us today. I was just so enlightened and unlocked by listening to you share your services with us.
thank you.
And,
Yeah. I feel absolutely honored, Jen. And we'll leave a couple of links. So where can people find you?
Yeah, I'm on Psychology Today. My website, which is www.myholisticselfcounseling.com. You can even just do myholisticself.com and it should go to the right website. My email is jennifer@myholisticself.com. And yeah, you can connect through the website or via email.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Wonderful.
So
Thank you.
Jen is absolutely coming back, right, Carm?
Absolutely. There's so many more questions I have, and so much rumblings within me. We would be honored to have you back again. There's so many different ways to go here. Yes.
And I'd be honored to be part of this lovely group again.
Thank you. And we'll leave our listeners with this amazing conversation, and from three wounded healers to our listeners. We wish you a wonderful day, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.